I discovered something called Biofotonics. It's the phenomenon whereby all DNA absorbs and emits light. Kind of blew my mind when I first discovered it. And I'm like, no way, this can't be real. But it is. All right. This was first discovered in 1947 by Alexander Geversht out of Ukraine. He discovered that there was a light coming out of yeast, the DNA of yeast. And, this was then verified by Russian scientists and Japanese scientists. And now it's a very well-established fact that all DNA absorbs and emits light. So if Adam and Eve are there in the garden and they're not yet fallen, they're in a good state, and they can receive all of God's glory. I mean, imagine this. And so they're just sucking it up, right? And then that DNA is absorbing it and then re-emitting it so that they themselves have this radiance about them.
Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you?
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want.
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hey guys, what is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we are about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Doc Brown, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. Hey guys, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Be sure and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Down below we'll have our social medias at their various platforms. That'd be much, much appreciated. Hey, be sure and flick that notification bell and don't miss out on a single solitary journey. Well, guys, I got a great episode for you today. This man, I've been listening to him for a few years now. I've been meaning to reach out for a long time. I've enjoyed his every episode I've ever heard him speak on. And you know how my ADHD is. I've talked about it on many episodes. But I actually seen him on a mutual friend of mine's show, and he just did another banger episode with that guy. And I was like, I finally just have to reach out to this guy. And I reached out, and he was willing to come on and speak with us. And actually, we had about a 48-hour turnover. So I'm extremely grateful for this man and his time. But I'd like to welcome to the show for the first time, hopefully the first of many times, Dr. Douglas Hamp.
What Satan looks like in that spiritual realm, that he is this great red dragon. And so then we see that iconography all over the ancient world. So that tells me that the ancient priests, the pagan priests, I don't know if they were doing drugs or if they somehow were able to open up a portal into the other realm. But in some way, some form, Satan and company were able to communicate what that other side looked like. And then these guys, they copied it and wrote it down. So it gives us a lot of insight as to Satan's early machinations, like what he was doing outside of the pages of the Bible, which is incredibly helpful. And, so we know about, of course, Genesis chapter 6, that in the days of, in the days of Noah, right, it was when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Bnei Elohim, or the sons of God, saw that the daughters of men were tovot, they were good and they were beautiful. And then they took them as wives, and it says that there were Nephilim on the earth in those days and also afterward. And there was an inscription that was found on top of Mount Hermon that talked about the 200 angels. It doesn't say 200, but it talks about this command that was given. And it says that, according to the command of the great bull god Batios, those taking an oath proceed from here. So I kept hearing about this this inscription, and I wanted to look for it myself. And what I found really interesting in the scholarship is the way a lot of other scholars have translated this. So Charles Warren, he was the first to discover this stele back in the 1800s. Then now this thing is in the British Museum. And then George Nicholsburg out of Harvard University, they translated it according to the great and holy God. Those taking an oath proceed from here. And George Nicholsburg, he said this is equivalent to what was found in the Book of Enoch, where it talks about the 200 angels that came down on Mount Hermon and that they took an oath. But I kept thinking to myself, this doesn't make sense, because they would not make an oath according to God, to Yehovah. This is the bad team, right? This was Satan and his crew that were doing bad stuff. So they're not going to take an oath in God's name. They're going to take an oath in Satan's name. And so as I look closer at this inscription, I discovered it doesn't say holy. It actually is this word batios, which is not a Greek word. And I kept looking and looking. Long story short, I found it in an inscription in southern Italy, and it had to do with Jupiter Batios, or Jupiter Batios. But again, I couldn't figure out what is Batios. But it's such an interesting history, and it's interesting because a lot of Christians never want to talk about this stuff. I mean, look, it is a little bit weird. It's out there. I never really considered myself one of those guys that, like, I do not wear a tinfoil hat. But, some of this stuff, you're like, this is weird. But once you start understanding that it is part of the biblical narrative, it really helps, because if we want to talk about a God of love, and then you talk about the flood, like, this God of love drowned everybody, you're like, well, that doesn't sound very loving. Well, maybe there was a reason. And if you ever seen a movie about zombie apocalypses, they all sort of end the same way, that everyone becomes infected with this zombie virus. And unfortunately, once you get the zombie virus, there's no going back. You're done for. You just have to be eliminated. And I think that's kind of analogous to what we're talking about, is that it wasn't so much a virus, but people became infected with this satanic strain, this fallen angel strain of DNA that corrupted the entire human race. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that it made them amoral people or immoral people, but certainly it was going to mess up God's plan. And I think that was the whole point. I talk about this in Corrupting Image Volume 1. I think Satan's master plan before the flood, and what led to the flood, was to corrupt the human race. That's why I call my book Corrupting the Image, because God made a promise back in Genesis 3:15 that he would send the seed of the woman. And it was through the seed of the woman, namely Jesus, that we could be born again. We could be redeemed, and our corrupted nature could be fixed. So you had to have a pure genetic line in order for that to happen. But if the entire human race, genetically speaking, is corrupted with Satan's DNA, well, I think that would kind of spoil the whole point. And I think that's what Satan was trying to do. Now, this is probably where your listeners are saying, wait, Satan has DNA? Like, what's going on? And that was a question that I really thought about as well, because I'm like, well, Satan is spiritual. He doesn't have DNA. And yet he does, because first of all, Genesis 3:15, I will cause enmity between you, Satan, and the woman, between your seed and her seed.
Are you a hunter, a hiker, or just an outdoor enthusiast? Well, if you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by. And finding all-American made is like finding Bigfoot in the woods. Hence the name of Squatch Survival Gear. Head on over to squatchsurvivalgear.com. Use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide. With the price of eggs and bread slowly approaching a day's wages, it's more important than ever than to secure the value of your dollar. One thing that has remained steady is gold and silver throughout the ages. Back in Roman times, a piece of gold would get you a toga. That's the equivalent of $3,000 today. That still remains true to this day. For a full suit, shoes, tie, you're looking at about $3,000. Because gold and silver holds its value. So if you're tired of watching the value of your dollar go down every single day, it's time to get off your hands and make a move. I've recently teamed with Cornerstone Asset and Metals. Reach out to those guys for all of your financial needs. It's time to trade in that forever devaluing dollar into hard assets that you can hold, like gold and silver. Be sure and check the link down in the description or the number on the screen. And hey, tell them Doc Brown sent you.
But Nimrod was Ninurta. He was the son of Enlil, according to these ancient documents. So he was the one who took on the kind of became the avatar for Enlil, and this is what the ancient records are saying. What is that Enlil, Satan, had a son who was known as Lord of the Earth, or Ninurta, Marduk, and then Enlil gave the Tablet of Destinies, which was kind of it was, let's call it the scepter, for him to then rule and have authority over the affairs of man. And so he held that by having this document, this Tablet of Destinies, he had authority over mankind. Now let's fast forward to Revelation chapter 5. And there we see, John says, I saw a scroll at the right hand of the Father, and no one was found worthy to open the scroll that had 7 seals on it. And so he wept. And then an elder comes and says, don't weep. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy to open the scroll. And he looks over and he sees a lamb as though it's been slain. And then he takes the scroll, and everyone's like, oh, yes, great, because you were worthy. You gave yourself. You died to redeem us. I believe that scroll in the Father's hand is exactly the same document that we're talking about in the ancient world, which was known as the Tablet of Destinies, because whoever controls that has authority over the affairs of man and can decree fates. And I think this is why John was so sad, because here you have this document that no one is found worthy to take authority over. And, so if we go back to the beginning, God makes the planet. He gives authority to Adam and Eve. He gives them dominion over the planet. Satan comes along and says, hey, can you want to give me those keys to the planet? And Adam says, sure, here you go. And as a result, mankind was enslaved ever since that point until Christ, who came and defeated death. He defeated that authority. And then Jesus says, I have the keys of death and Hades, right? So he took back that authority that Adam squandered. Jesus bought it back, and it now belongs to him. So it gets really exciting to start connecting the dots and seeing how the things that we see in the Bible are expressed in the ancient world and ancient Near Eastern texts. But we just have to understand that it's using different language, sometimes different names, but we're describing the same entities at the end of the day. But now through genetic manipulation, through the impartation of his own seed into a vessel of his choosing, that he was trying to create a variation on himself. I think Judas was the first, wasn't the first attempt, but he was the attempt in the time of Jesus. I think Nimrod was the very first attempt of where Satan was trying to impart his DNA, his seed, into a human so that he could have an avatar on planet Earth. I mean, let's think about it. The fallen angels do not seem to have real world presence in this world. And the Bible, and we see that good angels come here that they can manifest. They have corporal form. They can, really touch things and do things. But the fallen don't seem to have that ability. They can definitely influence us. They can, whisper in the night, and they can do things that can influence this world, but they cannot actually manifest in any kind of physical form. And so I think they are stuck having to work through some kind of a vessel. Sometimes that was simple as a possession. But I think in the ancient world, we don't really see anything about possession. I think that Satan was trying to do something pretty crazy. And when we go back to when God says to Abraham that your descendants will be slaves, and in the fourth generation, I will take them out, he says something really interesting. He says, because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Now, when the children of Israel come to the promised land, they are met with Nephilim. We read about giants.
Malachites.
If you look in the Hebrew, the word for giants sometimes is Nephilim, at least once in the book of Numbers 13. But other times when it's talking about the giants that are in the land, they're called Rephaim. And Rephaim comes from the root Rapha, which means to heal. So a doctor is a Rophe. But why would they be called healers or healed? Maybe that's a way to understand that word, Rephaim. I would suggest, if we go back and we kind of look at it, the god of the Amorites, his name was Martu, which is the same root word as Nimrod or Ninurta or Marduk. It's all the same root. And so I think the god of the Amorites was actually Nimrod. I think that it was Nimrod, and that he had now some type of ability to heal.
Well, with a lot of the stuff that I was digging through with Nimrod and stuff, like there was the Targums and the Ginsburg, the Legends of the Jews and stuff. They talk about the supernatural garments, from the Garden of God. Of course, I mean, this is in Ginsburg, the Legends of the Jews. We can debate if it was real or not, but it was, definitely a legend, a story being passed around between the Jewish people. But they attribute, and this is the first explanation that I'd seen given in an old text to Nimrod becoming a Gibborim. I know in Genesis, that's something that a lot of us it's caught our attention, and we've all debated, was it sexual rights? Was it, magical bloodletting rights? Or, what was this that he became a Gibborim? But in some of those stories, they attribute that to these garments. They say that it was passed to the eldest son, that Noah had them coming through the flood, and that in Ham's rebellion, that Ham steals the garments and he hides them and gives them to Cush, and that Cush holds them. And in his older age, he has Nimrod, whom he loves exceedingly. And that said that when Nimrod came of age at 20 years old, he gives him the garments from the Garden of God. And it says that when he puts them on, he becomes a Gibbor. I didn't know if you had run across that or what was your thoughts on that, because when you were talking about the Tablets of Destiny and stuff in that episode that I heard you speak on, my first thoughts went to these garments from the Garden of God, because they describe it in the terms of Ezekiel 28, every precious stone was your covering. So I was imagining this ephod, this breastplate with the 12 stones or whatever. I wanted to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think that's from the book of Jasher, which I don't remember reading that in Ginsburg, but
Ginsburg, they talk about the supernatural garments and how they passed down, and they were the skins of the Nakash. And
Well, yeah, that's a little tricky. I mean, when we go back to the garden, it's really interesting that I believe that that Adam and Eve were covered with light. I wouldn't say it was the skin of the Nachash, of the serpent, because obviously he was evil, and what they had was good. They had something very good. So I'm quite dubious that there was any type of special garment that was some physical specimen that they could take with them. I very, very skeptical of that. But insofar as there were garments of light, we do see that in Scripture. And I remember a friend of mine, he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, wait a second. Let's go back to when Moses was on the mountain, and it says, and he came down from being in God's presence, and it says that his face was shining light, and everyone was afraid to look at him. And so he put a veil over his face because then it would start to fade away. But after being in God's presence, his face is actually radiating light. And I think that was the same condition that Adam and Eve had before their fall, is that because they were continually in God's light, then they were always bathed in God's light, and then they themselves were also radiating. I discovered something called biofotonics. It's the phenomenon whereby all DNA absorbs and emits light. Kind of blew my mind when I first discovered it. And I'm like, no way, this can't be real. But it is. All right. This was first discovered in 1947 by Alexander Geversht out of Ukraine. He discovered that there was a light coming out of yeast, the DNA of yeast. And, this was then verified by Russian scientists and Japanese scientists. And now it's a very well-established fact that all DNA absorbs and emits light. So if Adam and Eve are there in the garden and they're not yet fallen, they're in a good state and they can receive all of God's glory. I mean, imagine this. And so they're just sucking it up, right? And then that DNA is absorbing it and then re-emitting it so that they themselves have this radiance about them.
All right, wanderers, here's one for you. Bigfoot's been spotted again. And this time, he's rocking a hat from the Soul Squatch. These folks aren't cranking out novelty shop swag. They're making gear that's Squatch approved. Thoughtful design, good materials, and built for the real deal outdoor use. But yeah, it still carries the myth. Whether you're out running trail cams or just catching your breath by the fire after a long hike, this gear holds up. Check them out at thesoulsquatch.com. And if you believe, you are already one of us.
And I think when it says that they ate of the fruit and then they realized they were naked, I think what happened is they weren't suddenly embarrassed because they didn't have any clothes on, like when you're in the shower, but they were clothed. They had a clothing which was light. And then when they ate of that, then the corruption began to take hold of them. And just like how Moses' face, the glory started to wane, I think that's what happened with Adam and Eve, is that they felt that something changed in their bodies and that the glory that they were covered in, it started to fade away. And so then they wanted to cover themselves. Again, not because, oh, Eve, don't look, I'm naked. I mean, they're the only two people on the planet. It can't be that bad. So they had something. They realized that the covering that they had was lost. And so then they were trying to come up with some kind of a substitute. I don't know. For me, that really helped me to understand what was going on back there in the garden. Because, sort of the Sunday school version that I heard is that, there they were naked. They were just kind of in their birthday suits and they were cool with it. And then they ate of the fruit and then suddenly they're embarrassed about being naked. I just think that's a little bit incomplete. Yeah. And again, we have to, connect a few dots here and there. But if we take the time and we understand some of the language, we understand the culture, we understand, what was happening with Moses, then those dots are really not so inconceivable. They make a lot of sense. And Jesus also said that we will be clothed in light in the age to come, that we will shine like the sun in the kingdom of our Father. Daniel chapter 12 says that we will shine like the sky and will shine like the stars forever and ever. So we're going to get that twinkle in our skin. We're going to get that back in the age to come. And I think that's pretty exciting to just, think about what that is. So that would be the garment that we had insofar as there being any other kind of garment that was snuck on the ark, I don't know. Call me skeptical, but that's where I stand on that.
Hey guys, what's happening? Hope you enjoyed that highlight reel. Hey, if you want the full conversation, be sure to go down to the description. I have links to the Spotify and Apple RSS feed. Go there, click the link. It'll take you to my RSS feed, and there you can enjoy the full conversation.